This week we'll do some installation work and review widgets to get set up for Voila, an easy way to make interactive dashboards, calculators, and other tools. Welcome to another MetPy Monday. Hello, I'm John Lehman, a software engineer for Unidata. This week, we're going to talk some more about something that we've talked about in the past, which is making handy tools, calculators, dashboards, using widgets, but we're going to expand on that using a tool called Voila. There's a little bit of setup work to do, so we're going to take care of that and review some widgets, and then next week, we'll look at using Voila to make a basic calculator application, and then we'll get a little more advanced. So the first thing we need to do are quite a bit of installation and configuration work. The commands shown up here are the commands that I ran to get set up to do this tutorial. First of all, we're going to install from Conda the IPython widgets library. You may already have this. Then I'm going to enable the widgets notebook extension. And now to get things to work in Jupyter Lab, it's a little bit trickier than it was in just plain Jupyter notebooks. First of all, you're going to need Node.js installed, which can actually be done through Conda. So Conda install from Conda Node.js. And then we're going to install a lab extension. So this lab extension is going to be Jupyter Widgets and the Jupyter Lab Manager. That will make the widgets work in your Jupyter Lab environment. Finally, we can install Voila. So Conda install from Conda Voila. Then we're going to install another extension, which is the Jupyter Voila extension and the Jupyter Lab Preview extension. That's going to let us see a preview of our dashboards. And finally, we're going to turn on the server extension for Voila, so it will actually work and serve up our application. So what is Voila? Well, it's a way to make a notebook into a basic web app without having to go ahead and learn and use some of the web toolkits that are out there. So you could use Flask or Django or some of the others. But if it's a simple, low-traffic application, Voila is really great, especially if it's something you want to stand up for a hackathon or just use inside your research group. I've really enjoyed working with this tool, and it makes quick demos very easy, or even wireframing a more complex application for later, or just making handy utilities for myself. For example, calculating something like density altitude, which we'll get to in the future. So after you run those installation steps, they should all complete without any errors. It's very important to read all of the text that the computer sends back to you, especially those last few lines, and make sure that the step was successful and that there wasn't a problem. Now that the installation is through, I would restart your Jupyter Lab server, and then we can go ahead and do some coding. So I'm going to import IPyWidgets as widgets. We've talked about widgets before in terms of the sliders and text boxes, and really this is just going to be a very quick review to help us remember how these things work and how we can hook them up. And then next week we'll start making our dashboard. So I'm going to create a slider, and I'm going to call it X slider. It is widgets dot, and I want to use a floating point slider, so I can select a floating point value. The description is going to be the label that my user sees, and this can be LaTeX syntax, so I'm going to use X enclosed in dollar signs to give it that variable look of LaTeX. I'm going to set the initial value to be, let's say, 4. Now I need a text box to show my result. So my result text box is going to be widgets.floatText. My disabled is going to be true because I don't want it to look like something that you can type in, so I'm going to make it disabled. And then my description is going to be what I'm doing to X in this case, which is relatively simple. I'm going to square x. Now we need to define some sort of a function that's going to take x and do whatever we're going to do to it and display that. So I'm going to call my function calc. And we're going to pass it some things, but we're going to ignore them. It doesn't matter. And what we're going to do is set the value of that text box. So our result text dot value is going to be the string of our x slider dot value squared. Now we need to somehow hook up these components. We need to make our calculate function run when the slider is changed. I'm going to use xSlider.observe. The name of my callback function, calc, and we're going to be observing a value change. Now that those are hooked up, and again, there are several ways to do this. We've looked at interact and some other tools before. We need to actually display our slider and our text. So for this, I'm going to use a vertical box so that they're one above the other. And this is more important when we get to more complicated dashboards that we want to lay out. So I'm going to use a VBox, which takes a list of the things that I want in it. I want the slider on top, which is X slider, and I want the result text on the bottom. So now you can see when I move the slider, observe hooks up the calc function, and we display the result. Now there are a few weird behaviors that you need to watch out for, and we've put in a deliberate mistake. Have you found it? Right, so they don't have a description showing here. You go back up and you say, well, it's right there, it should be fine. It's misspelled, and it's not actually raising an error because of some of the intricacies of how the widget ecosystem work. Now once I fix the spelling, then I have my correct label, typeset using tech, and my handy little calculator, which this is not that useful of a calculator yet. Next week, we're going to look at how to take more inputs, make a little bit more complicated layout, and be able to use Voila to turn this into a dashboard, as well as how to preview it in the notebook. Until then, I encourage you to go back and look at some of our other widget tutorials and think about what you're going to make for your calculator exercise next week. I hope that you found this useful, and I'll see you on next week's MetPy Monday.